Oris lent me their new watch. Ooh, yeah. And it is a legitimate tool watch. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Abdullah, and this is where I talk about watches that I find interesting. And one of those watches or watch brands is Oris. So Oris released a new watch within the Aquis line, and this is an absolute monster of a dive watch. It's the Aquis small second date. Now, for some reason, this Aquis isn't talked about as much as the traditional Aquis, the one with 300 meters of water resistance. There are certain aesthetic changes that this has that make it less appealing to the masses. And I'm going to talk about that. But for me, this watch is quite interesting because it shows you the approach of Oris. Just by looking at this watch and analyzing all of its details and the purpose behind those details, Oris has one fundamental philosophy of design, and that is to make purposeful watches. The watch has to be first and foremost functional. If you look at the big crown pointer date or the Pro Pilots, those were back in the day extremely functional. Nowadays, maybe not as much. So they have certain limitations. Even if you look at the Diver 65, in 1965, that was a proper dive watch with 30 meters of water resistance. Nowadays, it's more of a vintage inspired dive style watch. It's not ISO certified. It only has 100 meters of water resistance. Their purpose is to celebrate the tradition of Oris. But on the other hand, you have the Pro Diver with the depth gauge. You have the Big Crown with the altimeter. And you have the Aquis with 500 meters of water resistance. And this for me is a unique position where Oris places itself within the entry-level luxury watch segment. So let's talk about this watch. Like any other watch, this has a lot of good, but there are also some areas of improvement. So I'm going to talk about that. But before I talk about this watch, I have to thank Oris for lending me this watch and many others as they have done in the past. Honestly, if you guys have never been to an Oris boutique, I'm not talking about authorized dealer that carries different brands. I'm talking about Oris boutique and their customer service. It honestly feels like you're talking to a watch enthusiast than a sales staff trying to sell you things. That's my experience with Oris. As I've been saying, this watch is a legitimate tool watch. Everything from the bezel action. Oh, that sounds so good. It just feels so premium. The crown it's not sunken in, very easy to operate, even when wearing gloves. What makes this different from traditional Aquis? First of all, this has 500 meters of water resistance. So it is big. For me, that does make sense, not as a daily watch, not as your desk diver, but when you are planning to go deep diving, you want something that can withstand the pressure, that has a bit of heft, so you can feel it there on your wrist, even when you're kind of fighting that water pressure. It just has that weight behind it. It's not just that. When you have a larger dial, it's far easier to see in terms of legibility than a smaller dial. So yes, a smaller case will be more aesthetically pleasing in an office environment, in an everyday environment. But when you are using this watch as a utility tool, you want that instant legibility when you can tell the time and you can calculate the dive time just by glancing at it for a second. That's the whole purpose behind it. And then you have another feature, which is the small second. This, again, was quite straightforward. When you look at it and you understand that this watch has 500 meters of water resistance, it's a no-brainer to have a small seconds. Because when you are trying to measure your dive time, It's the hour and the minute hand and its connection with the dive bezel. That's the most important thing. That's what they did, just to kind of keep it there, but not let it interfere with the rest of the dial. The second thing is the date window. Now, on the traditional Aquis, you have the date window at 6 o'clock, which is something I absolutely love. It just blends in. It doesn't break the symmetry of the dial. But in this case, you have it at 3 o'clock. And the purpose of that is, again, functional. They don't want to remove that index at 6 o'clock. They don't want to cut down the index at 3 o'clock. So they placed it on the side just beside a full 3 o'clock index, which is genius. The case back is not transparent. You don't see that Solitas W200 movement, but you do get a practical unit conversion scale to convert meters into feet. So everything is utilitarian. Now, I did request Oris to send me this watch on a rubber strap because I have experienced their bracelet, which is nice. I wanted to see this on its rubber strap, and I have to tell you, the rubber strap is absolutely awesome. On the wrist, it's very comfortable and it can withstand the weight of this case. Solid clasp. You also get a diving extension. I believe it's their patented design. It's a near perfect watch. There are a few things I don't like about this watch. First of all, the case is a bit too big. I do understand the practical side of it, but when you look at the Pelagos, 500 meters, it still wears a bit smaller. So I do wish that they offered at least two sizes, maybe one in 42 and one in 45.5, which is this option. The second thing that I'm not a fan of, and that's not limited to this model, it's also my gripe with all Aquis models in general, which is the bracelet. If I'm to have a small watch collection, maybe 3 watch collection, and one of them has to be a diver, it's very limiting for me to be able to not change the bracelet or the straps. There aren't that many other options apart from these two. So that puts a big limitation on the Aquis line for me. But for its price, I think it's an awesome deal. This Oris sits alongside brands like Zin, which places them in that sweet spot where it's a level above in terms of their finishing, in terms of their technology, in terms of quality that you get, the customer service that you get. It's not a high-end luxury brand, but it's still attainable and you still get that luxury quality and all of the perks that a luxury watch has, basically. So what do you think of this watch? Let me know in the comments. And I do want to thank you guys. It is because of the growth of this channel that I'm able to reach out to brands like Oris to get hands-on with these watches. And I am trying to get to more brands. So share, subscribe, support the channel. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.